Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel on media integrity in the age of disinformation. I'm Filip Lukić. I'm a journalist from Belgrade, and I will be your host today here in Sarajevo. So today we will connect multiple cities across Europe. So Sarajevo, Kyiv, London, Paris, and Madrid. We aim to gather everybody here in Sarajevo, but due to pandemic, which is still ongoing and affects all spheres of our lives, but also the Russian aggression on Ukraine, it changed a lot regarding the plans of our speakers today. So we just decided to gather all of you in a hybrid event. So part of you will be present with us here in Sarajevo in Dom Mladih, and part of you via a Zoom platform. That counts both for the speakers and for the audience. So part of the audience consists of young journalists from the region of Western Balkans, and they are here with us in Sarajevo today. And you'll have also your time to ask questions and to discuss on such a pressing issue in a modern world of journalism. Also, let me greet members of the media community here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, also members of the European Union and member states, so diplomatic staff, members of the European External Action Service, but also members of the EU delegation to Bosnia and Herzegovina. So it's also very important that everybody who watches us online via Zoom have the interpretation button. So if you need translation into Bosnian or English, just press that button. That also counts for all TV stations that are broadcasting this event live, and also we are greeting them and the people in front of their TVs all across the region. Also very important information is that you can also watch this event via social accounts of the European External Action Service. So as I said, we'll try today to connect Europe, but not only Europe and the cities across Europe, but we'll also try to connect new young generation of journalists with such an experts, the experts in that sphere, in the sphere of journalism, people who are internationally recognized for their professional standards, for their professional reporting, and also people who are kind of acclaimed and praised for what they did for this profession. We think it will be good opportunity for young people from the region, for young journalists to discuss and to reflect on such important issues such as media integrity with a top level journalists from all over the world. So that's why we call this session Masterclass in Journalism, given by the masters of this craft. And so with no further ado, I would like to present my guest today. So here in Sarajevo, we have two ladies, two reporters. So Aida Čerkez, former AP correspondent from Bosnia and Herzegovina, so from the war that happened 30 years ago, and also Nadina Malić-Begović from Al Jazeera Balkans from Sarajevo. Via Zoom platform, we have first Roger Cohen from the New York Times from Paris, Ed Vulliamy from The Guardian and Observer from London, Rémy Ourdan from Le Monde from Kyiv, and Javier Espinosa from El Mundo from Madrid. And firstly, I would like really to thank all of you for joining us here today. I think it is maybe the first time that such names in journalism are gathered together in the same event, in the same panel to discuss this pressing issue such as media integrity in the age of disinformation. I think that war that's going on in Ukraine, the Russian aggression, actually showed us how important is to fight the disinformation and the misinformation, and also to try to actually report on things as they are, like not to hide or to interpret the truth, but just to tell the truth. And so before we start the debate, here is also a very special video message sent by Christiane Amanpour, also from from Kiev. And I would suggest firstly to watch that, and especially this is a message meant to inspire young journalists who are present here in the audience today.
Hello, everyone, and I'm really pleased to be able to join you from Kiev, Ukraine, because what's happening here today, 30 years after what happened in Sarajevo, what happened in Bosnia, is very, very similar, as only you all will understand and you will know. And as only all the journalists, my generation, your generation, all of us who covered Bosnia know what we are seeing unfold today is repeating a terrible, terrible pattern. It was in Bosnia that I first learned what it means to be objective. And I learned that objectivity does not mean being neutral, if that meant creating a false moral or factual equivalence. I learned in Bosnia never to treat the victim the same as the aggressor. I learned to be truthful and not neutral. And that is the slogan that I have emblazoned on this sweater and that I use all the time and that has carried me forward in my reporting ever since Bosnia. I know this day is devoted to media integrity, and again, I think that is absolutely fantastic, because just like in Bosnia, where they tried to sway the world by fake news and propaganda and hacking into the truth and denying the victims were victims and denying the aggressors were aggressors, and really changing the world's mind about who was in the right and who was in the wrong, they're doing it again here. The only difference, I think, is that the world is wiser these days, as Russia is such an accomplished use of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news. But still, I think the journalists have made it very, very clear, and the Ukrainian people themselves have made it very, very clear who is the aggressor and who is the victim. And so, for me, this is an existential struggle, just like it was in Bosnia 30 years ago. And the media plays a massive role in moderating and bearing witness to these existential struggles. In Bosnia, there was ethnic cleansing and genocide. Here in Ukraine, you can see the beginnings of the evidence of these terrible war crimes, crimes against humanity. We don't know yet whether they will be adjudicated as genocide, but these crimes are coming to the fore so much earlier because of the swarm of journalists and because this time the world is on the side of the victims, unlike in Bosnia. It took years for the world to understand. So I guess in closing, I'll just say that I really believe we all did our best and did our part to make sure that eventually the world understood the truth. And the truth, as I say, was not about being even-handed. It wasn't about both-siderism. It was about understanding what was happening right in front of our very eyes, understanding that there was an aggressor with a project that they had mapped out politically, and there were victims who were mostly civilians, men, women, and children. So good luck with the conference. I'm really glad to be able to participate even in this way, and goodbye for the moment from Kyiv.
So unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, Christiane Amanpour couldn't be with us here today due to the Russian aggression that she went to report from Ukraine, from the war zone. But I think it's very crucial what we've just heard from her. And I would like to start from there. Nadina, you just came back from Ukraine 1 month ago. You were there when the aggression actually started. And I think it's very important what we just heard about being neutral and being objective. So is it possible for a reporter in a war zone? I mean, how is it hard actually for the reporter in the war zone to be at the same time objective, but also true to the facts?
It is hard, of course, but also it depends on information we are talking about. The informations, of course, are very different. We are speaking about propaganda, we are speaking about disinformation, about a different kind of attacks, like hybrid attacks, especially in Ukraine. So we need really to be truthful to ourselves, firstly, because we need to see wider picture of what is going on there. We need to verify all the facts we have. We need to bring them to broader context, to meaningful context. So to make clear to make sure that we will bring just the truth. When we are speaking about being objective, about being neutral, about being true, I need to say that, for example, when we are speaking about a Russian aggression in Ukraine, if you ask Ukrainians, they will say it's a Russian aggression. I mean, it's an act of Russian aggression. But when we are speaking with Russians, we will hear that is special military operation. I would ask if it's the truth. I mean, sometimes when we are trying to be objective or neutral, we can bring false information to the audience. And I think that it cannot happen. We need to stand on our goals. We need to be truthful. We need to show such situation on a right manner. Another thing, when I was with my crew in Kiev, for example, there were a lot of disinformation. For example, pro-Russian accounts on Telegram application, they said in a moment that Volodymyr Zelensky, president of Ukraine, has fled Ukraine. You know, we were waiting for some minutes or hours maybe. After that, Zelensky made a video. He showed us that he is in Kiev because behind him there was a very well-known building in Kiev. So until that moment, I asked myself how to treat this information, this Russian information, because, you know, it was my first time being in a war zone, actually. I wasn't prepared for that. I was thinking before how to treat such information in, you know, in a normal situation when we are not speaking about war, about aggression.
Especially because you have to act very fast in order to decide whether the information is true or not.
Yes, actually, you need to be fast. But sometimes what was very helpful for me, because I was alone there with my crew, but we had another crews from Al Jazeera English and Al Jazeera Arabics. They have a lot of not only experience. For example, in that moment, they had crews in Kharkiv, in Kherson, in Mariupol, in different parts of Ukraine, and they had a broader picture than we have actually than we had in the moment. So it was helpful to me. But at the same moment, you know, I was alone standing there and wanted to decide how to treat this information. Okay, I have a few minutes, of course, to decide, but at the end, you know, you need to what I said at the beginning, the wider picture. Everybody was talking also before the war about the hybrid attacks, about cyber attacks, about informational war, which is ongoing. So I decided to explain the situation right on this way, you know, to explain that they are that there is a Russian army on one side with military actions, with attacking the building, the people, you know, because we are not speaking only about their military goals, as they said at the beginning, but I wanted to show that it is not true, actually. And I brought it in this context. I explained that there is another war ongoing, the informational war, and that the people can actually decide by their own if it's true or not. You know, in the moment.
So your strategy was to give the context to the audience.
In the first moment. But right after that, for example, I contacted my colleagues from Al Jazeera network, and they had more information because they were on different places. So I got with this information also going live with it.
But how, for example, do you decide whether you're gonna just state what somebody else said? For example, Russian army said this, Ukrainian army claims that. So as a journalist, as a reporter on the ground, how do you decide whether you are gonna skip some information because you already know it's not true, and you already know it's misinformation or disinformation, and or just to state and then to leave to the audience to decide what it wants to believe in?
I tried not to miss the information, but every time, if I'm not sure, if I wasn't sure, I try to bring the context just because of it, because, you know, I wasn't sure. I see myself as not so well experienced in a war zone. And I was thinking that the best option for me in that moment, and also for the audience, will be the best to listen what I have to say about this event. Of course, I'm not talking about disinformation, which is clear that they are disinformation. But on another hand, there are also another sources which I had, you know, for my contact. For example, in that concrete case, I had a fixer who was working with me, but on 24th of February, after the first explosions, she left the city with her family. But I was in a contact with her. She helped me a lot. And also we had some sources in Ukrainian government, but it was also a problem. But because when we are speaking about propaganda, we are not speaking only about Russian propaganda, we are speaking also about Ukrainian propaganda. Okay, Ukraine is a victim, we know all that, but at the same time, we heard, for example, from Ukrainian side that there are a lot of different type military actions which couldn't be true in that moment. Actually, we needed to check it. And also, they said, for example, the number of the Russians who were killed, for example, it was much higher than the number US intelligence service gave us. So there were some differences, and we knew that both sides are using propaganda in the same way, but we kept in mind all the time that on one side we have aggressor, on another side we have a victim, and we need to treat them like that.
And that's important to bear in mind as a reporter on the ground. And we'll talk more about it. Also, you said in one interview that you were in the middle of the chaos regarding propaganda from all the sides. But we have also Rémy right now in Kyiv. So Rémy, could you give the latest update? What's going on in Kyiv?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes, hello. Well, you know, Russians retreated from around Kiev a few days ago. I'm right now in Bucha. It's a small town northwest of Kiev, where the worst killings happened during the 4 weeks of Russian occupation. I'm right now investigating on what seems to be, you know, serious war crimes. Probably more than 300 civilians killed. And so the capital city is now quiet after 5 weeks of war. And the war is still going on, of course, in the east and in the south of Ukraine.
So what we've heard a lot during the past few weeks is about war propaganda and disinformation in the digital area. You also, you're a very experienced journalist and reporter, and you also experienced the war in Bosnia 30 years ago when it was the analog era. So is there any difference between these two ages? I mean, does digital era gave us any kind of new challenges, or they are pretty the same but just in different shape right now?
Well, I don't think it changed anything, or it changed much, honestly. For me, the digital era is something, you know, it changed maybe societies. It changed the way we all inform ourselves. It changed probably many things, but it didn't change reporting. You know what we do, reporting in war zones, it's a century and a half ago, you know, it started. And well, ironically, not far from here, in same country, same land where I am right now, because the first professional reporters started during the war in Crimea. and when you read both their reports and the way they were working, their memoirs, it's really very close from what we do right now, from what I did since Bosnia for the last 30 years. Ground reporting and war reporting is really about, you go there, you listen to people, you check your information, and you tell the story. The changes in the media from print to radio, from radio to TV, from TV to the web, and then from websites to social networks, it doesn't change what we do. The tools are changing, but reporting remains really, really similar to what that first reporter, Russell from Times of London, was doing in Crimea. As far as I know, I'm not an historian of reporting, but as far as I know, I can see two major changes in I'm not talking about journalism in general, but in the war reporting. The first major change was in the 60s. For the first century of war reporting, reporters were covering almost only military affairs. They were covering the battlefields, they were covering army stuff. And in the 60s, they started to get interested in civilians. The symbol of that turning point was the war in Biafra. And since then, majority of reporters are covering the civilians, the consequences of war, the refugees, in and around war zones. That was a major, I think, turning point. And what I see now, what I noticed, every conflict I go, is that it's only the few of us trying to do both. The civilians, the consequences of war, but still to cover the battlefield, to be with the fighters, to be embedded, as we say, with any army or militia. So that was a major turning point. On my opinion, it's important to do both because I don't know how you can understand the war if you don't understand the fighters. Why are they fighting? What are they fighting for? Their ideas, their cause. So I always try to do both if I'm allowed by those fighters. The second turning point maybe is not the digital era it's probably the 24 hours news that came a bit earlier, 1 decade earlier.
So we heard from Christiane Amanpour about the parallel between war in Bosnia and Russian aggression in Ukraine that's going on nowadays. From your own experience, what would you say maybe it's the main similarity, but also the main difference? Do we have Rémy? Okay, we can move on, and then later, if we have a connection with Rémy, we'll continue. So we also have Javier Espinosa in Madrid, and I think that's also a very good example, Javier, what you experienced in your professional career. You were captivated by ISIS for more than 6 months in Syria. So I would really like to start with that, and I would like to ask you to share your story with those young journalists that are in the audience today with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, it's very interesting because in these days, one of the members of this group that was holding all these Western journalists and humanitarian workers is being put on trial in America, in Alexandria. And it's very significant because the families of the victims of this group have been for years demanding that these guys could be accountable, like they were in Bosnia, no? Like what happened after the war in Bosnia. because normally what happened is that these guys normally just run away without any punishment, or they were punished by drones with extrajudicial killing, which is also illegal. So it's quite interesting, this trial, because people will be able to listen what they have done to the hostages, and could realize that there is a big difference between democracies and the people members of these extremist groups. And this is what the families of the victims were demanding. Diane Foley was always saying they should face a fair trial, not just killing, like a drone. And I think it would be very interesting that the people who are had the time will follow this trial, like they followed the trials on Bosnia.
So, do you think that the public is actually aware of the importance of journalism? Do you think that they're aware of sacrifices that journalists make in order to report, in order to bring the information to the public?
It's a very interesting question, because normally what happened, and it happened, I saw it in Syria, it's happening right now in Ukraine, it's starting to happen, is that many locals show the anger against the Westerns because they asked for help, and the only Westerns that they see are the journalists, and normally we had to face their anger. And as I said, it happened to us in Syria. And I understand completely the situation, because they feel that they have been abandoned by the Western world, they don't receive the help that they demand, and the people that they see from the Western world are the journalists. So they blame us, and sometimes they behave in a kind of aggressive way, or they don't want to talk to us. And I said, I understand completely the situation, because they are victims of a terrible situation. But they have to understand as well that right now, I don't know the percentage, but most of the people who are covering wars are freelancers. The freelancers, I'm a staff member, so I'm not a freelance. But most of the freelancers, what manage to do is just to cover expenses. I don't think they get huge amount of money for covering wars. Even the staff members, I don't know the rest of the media, but in my case, for example, we get nothing from going to a war. We do not get any kind of added money. It used to be that people used to get that kind of a special payment for going to dangerous zones, but I think this is over. So we are doing that. I mean, we get the same kind of money for staying at home or going to a war. And I think it's just because we feel that we should go there to report about a catastrophe, a situation so terrible like that. But it's not for the thing that people could think just to get money or to get there. I'm sure that there are journalists who just think about for the ego, not to get kind of so important. But this is a minority. Most of the people who goes to report on wars do it because they feel that they have to show the suffering of the victims of these situations, and this has to be understood by the locals as well.
But is there a boundary? Because a lot of journalists actually are risking their own lives in order to report. So is there a boundary for a journalist? You just said that they have this kind of intention to present to the world the facts about the war crimes, about what's happening in war zones. But is there a boundary for the reporters?
Well, I mean, the limit is to try to be effective. And if you get wounded or you get killed, you are not effective in the way that you are not going to show the suffering of the victims in any case. So you had to put, it's difficult to know what is the place where you can go and the risk that you had to take, because this is not mathematics, it's not 2 + 2 = 4. And but as Rémy said, you had to mix and to create a balance between the covering of the civilians and the covering of the fighting, because you have to understand the dynamic of the war. And unfortunately, the dynamic of the war is designed by the fighters. So it's quite difficult, but you had to do it. and the limits, it's not written, it's not, I always recommend that the people who want to start this job, to do this job, goes to these specific courses that prepare you to work in conflict zones. Because there are two ways of learning this. One is that we did, just going to the wars. And I mean, there were many cases of people who started going to wars and were killed. In Bosnia, we saw there was one Spaniard who was killed on the first day that the war, the first day that he arrived on Sarajevo, he was killed. But, well, many others, like me, for example, or many others, learn in that way. But now you have the opportunity of going to these courses. And I was, at the beginning, to be honest, I was against, because I thought, well, I'm going to learn. I learned a lot. And I learned, for example, that you have to be always behind a wall. And you think this is stupid and it's obvious. Well, it's not such a stupid thing. I was in Baba Amar and I just got behind a wall, and that saved me from a shell that killed Mary Colvin and Rémy Ourdan. And this is a very specific example. You learn in these courses things that will save your life.
You probably partially answered to my next question, but I would like also to ask you for the message to those young people here, to tell them what defines a good, an extraordinary war reporter, for example.
Well, you had to be sensible, and you had to put yourself always in the shoes of the people who are talking to you, and to understand that they are under tremendous stress and pressure in a situation that is not the normal situation from where you come from and where you stay normally. And you had to listen to them, and you had to I mean, just to take time to connect with them. And you had to learn a lot about history as well. It's not only personal connection. You have to learn. I always said that the worst doesn't come from nowhere. It's just you work, when you wake up this morning and you say, okay, let's start invading Ukraine. No, that has a history behind. In Bosnia it happened, in Ukraine it happened. You had to learn and to read a lot about history, because that will give you the keys about what is going to happen in the future. And you will learn about how to behave on the ground. And you will get a lot of histories, a lot of articles, and a lot of reports that you can do. You will learn it, and you will get it from history, because you will see this is what happened in this time, it's going to happen again, because history is always repeating itself. Unfortunately, I mean, in wars, you think it's quite a crazy situation, and it is. But many scenarios are repeating itself. How many times we have been reporting about the museum, the zoo, the hospitals, of course, the morgue. I mean, you always go to the same places. So that's developing a kind of techniques. And this is coming back to what I said before. You learn these things in these courses, where to go, how to go. So you don't have to go there and to learn it in a hard way, just arriving like a parachuting on the wall and say, oops, what I'm gonna do today. No, it's better to learn it before. Now that we have the option, it wasn't before. This kind of courses, I didn't know it when I started in Bosnia. But now you have the option, and you can learn to do it that. And also you have to have values. I mean, one thing that I'm always against is the macho type, the Rambo type of journalists who just say, I've been here for, in the only one in this trench, and I want to show all the shooting, and I don't like it. And this, I don't think, is the type of journalism that we should promote. I mean, this is about all the people, about the victims of the wars. It's nothing about the journalists. Journalists should not be, shown. I mean, we are nothing like messenger. We are only messengers. So we should not be part of the story.
Thank you for those very important remarks. And Aida, we've heard a lot about war in Bosnia during this panel, and the parallel between the war in Ukraine and Bosnian war. So, just Javier said the history is repeating itself, and the Russian aggression actually brought back the war to Europe. after 30 years. And speaking of integrity of journalists, you were also very personally engaged here during war in Bosnia. You were correspondent for AP, but you were also witness of what's going on here and what happened to your own country. So how do you find the balance there, trying to preserve your integrity as a professional, but also to be a human being, to feel everything that human beings feel?
Yes, I had a different experience from everybody else here. You all went to somebody else's war. In my case, the war came to me, and it affected my life, my social network, my country, my people. You have to understand that once you understand that a war has several layers, several segments, the armed conflict is just one of them. It's the most obvious one. But there are other segments of a war that are going on while being overshadowed by the armed conflict. It's the economic war, for example, which we now see between Russia and the rest of the world with all the sanctions, and will there be gas, will they switch it off, how they're gonna pay it. That's also part of the war. There's a cultural war, as you can see, also going on. And there is another layer, a very important one, the media war. Now, you find yourself, apart from being part of all of those other wars, you as a journalist, whether you want it or not, you find yourself in the middle of a media war. It's more or less a propaganda war, but that's also media in a way. So how do you resist? How do you recognize what's a lie and what's the truth? Difficult, yes. But it becomes easier once you figure out, and how do you fight with yourself? Because you are personally affected. This is your country, it is your life, but you have to be objective. It's difficult because you just lost someone, and it's against your nature to be difficult. There's rage, there is sadness, there is anger in you. Once you ask yourself, what is everybody's goal here? What's the goal on one side? What's the goal of the other side? What's my personal goal? And if you define that your goal is to make the world a little bit better, not just your country, but in general, then the best way, the best tool is the truth. So to all of these wonderful people who intend to become journalists, I can say there is patriotic journalism, and it's very easy to slide into patriotic journalism once your own country is affected, your own being is affected, when you are the victim and the reporter. But if you really are a patriot, then tell your nation the truth. Don't lie to the one you love. And if you extend the context, you're not only reporting for your own nation, you're reporting for the future of this planet. You're reporting for the whole civilization. If you want to leave a mark after you when you die one day, then remember, I made the world a little bit better because I exposed the truth to everybody, and I spoke only the truth. And if you keep that in mind, you will very easily become, it just happens. You get this shield all of a sudden that protects you from all the propaganda attacks on you. You become somebody who can recognize them, and when you hear propaganda, there's all kind of trumpets setting off in your head. And it's not that difficult. You just have to know why you're doing what you're doing.
But I have to ask, what was, because you mentioned war propaganda and everything that was going on here in Bosnia 30 years ago. Also this week, we marked the anniversary of the longest siege in Europe of one city. What was the most painful part for you as a journalist and at that time?
I think speaking to victims and listening all day long. It's like a psychologist. You only hear problems, you only hear other people's troubles, and you have to be affected by the fates of these people, by their suffering and by their sadness, especially if they lose children. To me, that was the most painful experience. But even though, don't cry. Remember that the story you are just about to say, to tell the world about this dead child is more important than what you feel right now. And you will somehow give some kind of a meaning to this death. If you don't report about it, it's a little bit like it never happened.
But for example, how hard was it to come to your home in the evening after the whole day, the ground reporting and seeing on the news something completely different? The story that actually you were not experiencing in the field.
I didn't even go home during the war. I slept in the office for 3.5 years, actually 4. Because you work nonstop, you work 24 hours. Yeah, I think I wrote that in a letter that I wrote to the Ukrainians recently. And I wanted to tell them that they will be hungry, they will be, lose family, they will lose their homes, they will be dirty, all kinds of troubles. But the ones that will, the one trouble that will hurt them the most, and the one that the adrenaline doesn't cover in the right way. You get into the survival mode, the adrenaline is keeping you in this survival mode and you're acting. But this one thing that this adrenaline cannot do for you, or may even be counterproductive, is when you hear information that everything that happened today to you was somehow your fault, that you did this to yourself, that you are shooting at yourself. No matter how illogical that sounds to you and how angry that makes you, it affects also the outside world. And it's meant for the outside world to confuse the outside world about the roles in the war, who's the victim and who's the attacker. And it's sometimes in Bosnia, it was a little bit effective, I have to say, because people on the outside world listen to that propaganda and they kind of, maybe it's true. Maybe they actually did shell themselves. That's kind of possible. It's possible, but is it probable? And you have to, as an outside observer, you have to ask yourself these questions and realize as an observer that they are meant to confuse you to the point where you're going to say to yourself, I don't trust anybody anymore, everybody's lying. Once they bring the viewer to that point where he decides not to trust anybody else, they won. Because that was their goal, because they don't trust you as the victim anymore. And that's the job done.
But having mentioned the letter that you wrote to Ukrainian people, you also say in that letter, the world knows what you're fighting for. Do you think or believe or feel that the world has learned from its own mistakes from war in Bosnia that happened 30 years ago?
Yes, we keep saying history repeats itself. Not really. During the war in Bosnia, although journalists defined who the victim is and who the aggressor is, there was an arms embargo on the victim. The world behaves completely opposite now in Ukraine. Everybody supports them with weapons, with everything they can, with economic sanctions, And the world has seen, actually the upper echelons of the world have actually taken the right stand. In Bosnia, they had not. That's a step forward. Plus, all the propaganda that is coming out now out of Russia, I understand why they're doing it. Nobody believes this anymore, or rarely anybody believes this anymore. That's a significant difference. And there's another difference in war reporting, and Rémy mentioned that a little bit, but I would just like to add, you know, who discovered Auschwitz? The army. Who discovered the concentration camps in Bosnia? Journalists. Who reported first on war crimes in Ukraine? Citizens. So that's kind of the difference in this digital world.
And thank you for this lovely introduction to our next speaker. We are going to London to Ed Vulliamy, who actually was one of the journalists who discovered war crimes here in Bosnia 30 years ago. Ed, even I wanted to start with another topic and to make it more broad, but I think it will be good to also to reflect on that here. You had the kind of a personal war against manipulation and disinformation, and that time due to the war crimes and concentration camp Omarska that you actually found. How difficult was it to fight back and to defend actually what you witnessed there?
Very difficult indeed, and I'm not even sure that it was successful. Aida's presentation has been so moving and sort of morally powerful. So I'll go straight to the camps, but I think we need to expand the discussion perhaps a little beyond war reporting as well. Yeah, look, I mean, not everybody aged 39 gets to walk into a concentration camp without quite knowing or understanding what it was at the time. A rape camp, a death camp, and the rest that Omarska, Ternopil and Keretem, about which we heard that day, were. I don't need to remind you all of the actual story itself. They were established 3 months before we found them. The Red Cross knew about them, but did not want to jeopardize their form of neutrality. To get to that, which I want to later, by upsetting the cart, so to speak, or upsetting the people who were running the damn things. But the story that really concerns us today is that after the concentration camps had an impact at one level. They're credited with having set up the tribunal in The Hague, or at least moved the so-called international community to do so, to very little avail, I would argue, in the end, after testifying at 9 trials, but make a lot of money for a lot of lawyers. Don't seem to have put off Messrs. Putin, Bin Laden, al-Baghdadi, and Assad very much. But what happened after the war was that they didn't. Our discovery of the camps had no impact whatsoever, in as much as the world said this cannot go on. But it did for 3 long, bloody years, as you all know, until the massacre at Srebrenica in 1995, with the connivance of the West, as Aida has indicated. But what happened, and what concerns us here, is that a bunch of Trotskyites in Britain and Germany decided, for their own purposes, which were by and large support for the genocidal enterprise, which they thought was a good idea, that the camps were fake. I won't go into all the details now. ITN, with whom I found those camps that day, sued this outfit called Living Marxism. They won, but that didn't make any difference at all. It became rather chic in the left-wing salons of London, Berlin, and America to say that the concentration camps were a fake. Living Marxism was supported by such people as Harold Pinter, Doris Lessing, Faye Weldon, Noam Chomsky, and others, against whom there has been no sanction whatsoever. Pamela Anderson came into the Frontline Club in London the other day and introduced me as the person who'd found the camp, said, "Oh, wasn't there a problem with that?" It goes on and on and on. And my point really is, with regard to those, once you drop a little bit of arsenic into the reservoir of water, even though it's only a drop, you can't drink the water. It was hard, it was painful, it was awful, but let's go to Aida's point about adrenaline. If it was hard enough for us as reporters, what was it like for the survivors and the bereaved and the violated women to be told by a bunch of armchair idiots, academics and Trotskyites, with the support of the British establishment, this did not happen to you, it was faked. Well, it did happen to you because you know damn well it happened to you. So that's my answer, my immediate answer to you. My more general answer to you is, and picking up on what Aida and everybody says, Christiane especially, this thing about neutrality and objectivity, I've been bleating on about that for decades to no avail. They're not the same thing. One is fact specific, the other is a moral judgment. To you good people going out into this profession, don't have any illusions about the industry. Your job, your duty is to tell and speak the truth and only the truth, and to walk a straight line. That should be simple. That should be easy. It's not. Such are the contaminations of ideology and the temptations of promotion and cash reward. The other big story I got during my excuse for a career, there've been a few others, but the other main one was when the ex-head of the Soviet desk of the CIA told me that the entire intelligence community of the Western world knew that Saddam Hussein had no weapons of mass destruction, that the whole casus belli for the invasion of Iraq was a lie, a calculated, knowing lie, disseminated by politicians and journalists alike. My story was censored by my own newspaper, which was Cozy Cozy with Tony Blair, and the people who did it, there's actually a film about them, starring Keira Knightley. Rissy fans more me than I am. Who's that old hippie shouting at his editors all the time? I wonder who that could be. The people who were responsible for that censorship, obliged to leave the Guardian group, became respectively managing editor of the Daily Mail and editorial director of the BBC. So be aware, good people, that to get on in this profession and in this industry, I should say, it pays to lie, it profits you to censor more than to walk the line, the straight line of truth. That's how the industry works. I'm talking to you from London, which after Beijing and Moscow is kind of lie factory number 3 in the world, I argue. We publish here the 2 most read newspapers in Europe, the Daily Mail, which is an ultra right-wing newspaper, but nobody calls it that, which has been lying with great success for about 150 years, and The Sun, which is the world's top-selling newspaper, which has been lying to great political effect, winning elections with a daily dose of pornography, lies, and cheap scandal. So let's not have any illusions about this profession. It is sleazy, it is corrupt, it is dirty, and its business is not the truth, but within it are people who do tell the truth, and Javier and Rémy and Roger and Aida are among the very best of those who do. Christiane, of course, as well. So my answer to your question really is speak truth. Above all, speak truth to power, even though I think power actually does not fear truth and seems to survive exposure. People like Blair and co suffered and heard with Bosnia, Mitterrand with Bosnia, Akashi with Bosnia. They have suffered absolutely no sanction whatsoever for any of this outrageous misdemeanor and culpable untruth for which they're responsible. But speak truth, power. But don't expect it to be easy, because the powers on pitted against you are extremely cogent.
I think that also brings us to the topic of Brexit and what manipulation of information did it, and what was the purpose of it in that process. You also mentioned British public space, and also Great Britain as one of the factory of disinformation and manipulation by the tabloids usually. For example, do you think it is possible to prepare society for such scenario, to somehow prepare people to be aware how to fight misinformation when they face it? Because I think that we all knew that war propaganda works very well, but we were kind of surprised when it worked also very well in Britain, one of the most developed democracies in the world.
Well, 2 points. With the point about preparing people, indeed, when you take the oath in a British court of law, you undertake to tell the truth, nothing but the truth, but also the whole truth. Who's telling the whole truth about Putin's, to use your word, preparations for all this in the West now? Who is calling Boris Johnson for basically prostituting the city of London to Russian money while he was the mayor? Who is calling out? Well, actually, Roger is calling out his role in the French elections. We need not just the truth and nothing but the truth. We need the whole truth. Journalists, the other duty of journalism is to join the dots. You know, the game that kids play where you join all the dots and you get a picture. Until we do that, we're not doing our job either. It's the truth, nothing but the truth, and the whole truth. Brexit, well, yeah, London is the most developed democracy, blah, 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 but it's also the seat of a grotesque imperial power. Aida made the point about patriotic journalism. I began my excuse for a career in Ireland. My job at the very beginning, almost just barely out of my teens, was to be an anti-patriotic journalist and to speak truth not only to power but to empire, and the last vestige of that rotten, awful, ghastly, brutal empire, which was Ireland, and they're still there. So a journalist must be anti-patriotic, in my view, in that regard, if they come, as I do, from the remnants of an imperial, brutal imperial power. But thank you for mentioning Brexit, because Brexit is nothing if not a sort of resurrection of the pompous hubris and the triumph of stupidity and xenophobia that characterizes empire. It's a good question. Yes, the tabloids played a huge role. Yes, Putin and his allies in this country, Boris Johnson, Nigel Farage, and so on, puppets, I would say. They had a thing called Cambridge Analytica, which fed a lot of false information about Brexit. It was all done by Russians. It's all very well, but please don't have this illusion about the mother of parliaments at Westminster and all that. I mean, it's a corrupt, rotten, ghastly institution. The problem with blaming disinformation for everything is it lets the people off the hook. We also have schools in this country. You don't have to be stupid and nasty. The fact is, if the majority is stupid and nasty, then it's stupid and nasty. We can do what we can. But back to my point, I mean, our business is truth, and we swim against the river. And over Brexit, they won, we lost. We are derided by both the left and the right in this propaganda campaign to which you're referring as the cosmopolitan elite. It's no coincidence that that's the term that both Stalin and Hitler used to demean the Jews. It's been very, very tough. But Aida used the word existential. It's not just politically toxic or economically toxic, it's existentially toxic. But I fear to say, I feel that it's too easy to blame misinformation. I think that the British people have come home in a way with Brexit. I think they have found this is, as you say, a democracy. I think they have found their natural leader in Boris Johnson and all he is and stands for.
Thank you, Ed. But I truly believe that journalists then they're to actually defend the public interest, to fight propaganda and also misinformation, and to try actually to expose people to other things they don't believe they're true. But that also, I think, leads us to the next topic of professional standards, because we truly believe that's also a very important part of integrity, especially integrity of profession and integrity of journalists. So with us today is Roger Cohen as well. We are going to Paris now. Roger, what would be your advice to those young people sitting here in Sarajevo? So which professional standards should they always follow in order to be a top level journalist such you are?
Thank you, and hello from Paris. Well, I think Ed has just said a lot of what needs to be said, and Rémy also said some of it. While, I mean, I started out filing by telex from Beirut, and just about everything in journalism has changed since except the essence. The essence, I would say, is to be there, is to have your boots on the ground, to bear witness, to hold power to account, to speak truth to power, to relentlessly using all your senses, what you see, what you hear, what you sense, what you smell, what you touch. I mean, a journalist arriving in a new place is the same today as when I arrived in Bosnia 30 years ago, or when David Halberstam arrived in Vietnam 50 years ago. It's using all your capacities to try and establish the truth. And as both Christiane and Ed have said, I think it behoves us all to be fair. I mean, I went and spoke to Karadzic, I spoke to Mladic during the Bosnian War. To be fair, but fairness is not neutrality. I mean, when you're watching pregnant women being blown up by shelling from the hills around Sarajevo, it's pretty clear morally, just as it is today in Bucha in Ukraine or in Mariupol, where right and wrong, good and evil are situated. I think the ethics of doing all that are pretty clear and pretty unchanging. I mean, if they don't suit you, you probably shouldn't be a journalist. You know, there are other easier ways to make money.
But do you think, is it easier nowadays to find the truth than it used to be 30 years ago due to all digitalization, social media, networks, channels? Do you think, is it easier for journalists to spread the word about, for example, war atrocities? You just mentioned Bucha. Do you think it's easier nowadays to present to the public what happened there than it used to be, for example, in Bosnia, in Srebrenica, or other places where also war crimes were committed?
Well, that's two separate questions. Spreading the word, is it easier to spread the word, and is it easier to find the truth? Those are two different things. I think in terms of spreading the word, there's no question we're bombarded by images and commentary and some great coverage from Ukraine today. Unfortunately, hardly any of that is reaching the Russian people, who presumably would ultimately be responsible for ousting Putin from power. But the immediacy, I was still carrying around, as was Ed and Rémy, a great big satellite phone in Bosnia that had to be set up and to communicate, and often it was very difficult to file. That's gone. So yeah, I think it is easier to spread the word, and that's very important. I suppose finding the truth, I'm not sure. Yes, there's immediate access to endless information on these gadgets that we carry around everywhere we go. Is that the truth? I'm not sure. It's certainly a bombardment of information. I believe that great journalism involves immersion in place. Immersion in place. Well, we were very thoroughly immersed in Bosnia when we were there. I mean, you were there, 100% there. Now, when you're carrying this around, are you ever 100% anywhere? is your attention ever wholly on one thing? Do you allow what surrounds you to penetrate fully, so that you can give that fair, honest picture that I talked about earlier? So I think the immediate accessibility of information should not be confused with the rapid determination of what is actually going on.
Is that a way forward for the new generation of journalists?
Is what a way forward?
To be aware that those channels that are available right now, they're not always a way to find the truth.
Well, if I was exhorting your audience and young journalists in general to do something, I would say, go there, go there, go there. A telephone interview is a tiny fraction of a real interview. You have to look somebody in the eye. You have to look the bereaved woman who just lost her son in the eye. You have to see the corpses lying in the road or being wheeled into the morgue. You have to hear the shelling. You have to see those women that I saw in Tehran in 2009 advancing straight into the ranks of security police, who then set upon them and beat them. There is no substitute for that. No technology, no brilliant new technological invention can bring you that. So if you want to be a journalist, and you may want to reconsider that, but if you want to be a journalist, get out there. You know, it's tough. Then, of course, you can supplement whatever you're seeing, hearing, feeling, etc., with the immense resources that have now become instantaneously available. It's very dangerous what's happening in journalism today. Things go too fast. They simply do. There is no way at the speed that journalists are asked to operate today, at that speed, there is no way to maintain the same standards of accuracy, fact-checking, and copy editing. It's just impossible. There are going to be more typos. There are going to be more corrections. There are going to be more articles that prove not to be quite right. But we're all in that speed-up machine that is called modernity. And journalists are no exception to that. So take a breath, step back. I've always said, you know, what's the secret of interviewing? The secret of interviewing is not to go into an interview with a list of questions. The number of interviews I've watched that profoundly irritate me, where you see the interviewer glancing at the questions he or she has prepared throughout. It's an interview has to lead somewhere, ideally. And if it's going to lead somewhere, then you have to be listening to the answers you're hearing and asking the necessary follow-up questions. There's something else that's very important about the interview, which after all is a foundation of what we do. Silence. Okay, listen through the silences. Sit there, wait, and maybe at the end of that silence comes your epiphany, the sudden insight into what is actually going on.
And focus on people.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've always been personally most interested in people's stories and the way those people's stories in Bosnia or elsewhere tell the wider stories of what is going on. Javier was talking about history. My God, I couldn't agree with Javier more. I mean, read the history of places. You will never understand anything if you don't. And if Bosnia was a lesson in anything, it was a lesson in the terrifying power of history, of distorted history, of history distorted to nationalist ends, of that story of the endless victimhood of the Serbs that the avenging Serbs would now efface. History is dangerous. History is very dangerous. You only have to look at Moscow today to understand that, this obsession of Vladimir Putin. God, it reminds me of the Balkans. You know, in that treatise he wrote last summer, 5,000 words sitting in his COVID-19 isolation, 5,000 words beginning in the year 890 or something. To prove what? To prove something patently false, that Ukrainians are actually Russians, Well, the irony of this whole appalling invasion is that, if anything, has indelibly cemented Ukrainian nationhood for the rest of time. It is this absolutely unnecessary invasion of Ukraine in pursuit of an illusion that Vladimir Putin overtook, just as Slobodan Milosevic, was obsessed with the idea of the ethnic Serbs in Bosnia, creating Greater Serbia, destroying Bosnia, and we all know the consequences of that.
Okay, Roger, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we don't have more time for this part, because I would also like to give the floor to young journalists who are here with us today, as I mentioned multiple times before. So we have around 20 young journalists from all over the region of Western Balkans, from Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Albania, North Macedonia, and Montenegro. And I hope that this discussion somehow opened new perspective for you, and that you got inspired by the remarks of those top-level journalists. But while you're gathering your ideas, I would also like to invite the deputy head of EU delegation to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Jurgis Vilčinskas, to share his thoughts. And because this event is also organized by the EU, the event of bringing young journalists from the region here in Sarajevo today, and also gathering all those top-level journalists, very experienced ones, to share their own experiences with the new generation. So please.
Well, thank you, Filip. And I would really like to start probably thanking our panelists on behalf of organizers, the European Union External Action Service. I think all the insights, all the advice, all the testimonials that we heard right now, I mean, we will really take them to our heart. I think, especially working and supporting media organizations here in Western Balkans, but also far, far beyond this region. Just a couple of days ago, we actually marked 30th years anniversary of the start of Sarajevo siege. And I mean, it was really happening amid another siege, amid the siege of Mariupol in Ukraine. And I mean, we see sort of time and time again, as some of the speakers mentioned, that war is really at testing times for media. I think media, independent voices are always the first to be repressed during the times of war, the first to be shut off. And also the next thing that usually comes is, of course, the disinformation, is the information manipulation. And this we have seen in Ukraine, this we have seen 30 years ago as well here in Sarajevo. So we need really to think sort of hard how we deal with this. And I think the fact that we have today, with us experienced panelists, war journalists, and the young generation, who probably will somehow define in the next years how we counter disinformation in the war times. It's really have to have these two camps together, so they can learn from each other, so they can share the experiences and think, how we will do it in the digital era, where the online manipulations are so, enabling rogue actors to reach very, very large audiences. So I would stop here, but before stopping, I would probably like to put a question, to the panelists and maybe to those who are here in Sarajevo, Nadina, Aida, to ask you, whether you have a good personal recipe, how to do the good job exposing the lies Because I mean, of course, journalists are always focused on telling the truth, right? But do you think at this moment you also have to be a little bit, you know, working as a kind of fact checkers, if you like, and looking at the ways also to expose the lies as you know, as the wars are waged? Thank you.
Thank you, Jurgis. So, who would like to answer? Aida?
Okay, I'll start. How to respond to lies? Again, by telling the truth and then telling afterwards that this side actually claimed this and that. For example, you're reporting. You have come to Bucha. You have seen what you have seen. You have investigated whether these bodies are real bodies, whether, you know, you have established the truth, and you're reporting. And you're reporting about this particular massacre. Say in the end, however, Russians have said that this is all manipulated. Here I'm standing where this happened, and just expose it. Don't say it's not good to say they lied. Let the viewer, let the reader be confronted with the situation, all the facts, and then say what the other side says, preferably counting on people's reason that they can conclude themselves who's telling the truth. Or you just say, this is not what I have seen. That's, you know, that's the best you can do. But, you know, I just want to say, to expose the lie, it's really easy to sit somewhere in St. Petersburg and come up with something that your regime right now needs and construct a story, place it on Facebook and on Twitter, and it takes its course. It makes its rounds. To prove that this is not true is expensive. You have to send a person there. That costs the plane ticket, the salary, the equipment this person needs. You can't send somebody to Bucha alone. You need a team. Exposing the truth is always more expensive than just sitting down and coming up with a lie, you know. So I would also not address now the journalists here, they know that, but the public. If an information is for free, then you're probably the product. Real information costs. Subscribe to somebody, to some media that you found you can trust, because these journalists have to live of something. If you don't pay them to tell you the truth, somebody else will pay them to present you a lie.
Nadia, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I would add, for example, in Ukraine, we have seen a lot of different stances among all of them. Actually, every day there were lies. And when you are actually on the ground, it's a good thing that you are able to be there to witness something. You know, for example, the moment when they hit the building, residential building with civilians, you know. But the problem could be when you are not able to be on the ground. I mean, Aida told already, it is expensive, but, you know, for example, the journalists here deserve maybe a little more respect, you know, regarding that, you know, to be able for doing this job tomorrow, to go on the ground, to be there, to be witness, to bring the story to the people, to the audience. So I think it is very important to show that on another side you have a lie, and to, you know, to make clear before that it could not be an option.
Okay, thank you. So the part that we were all waiting for, so journalists, the floor is yours. Do we have any question? Yes. And please, when you ask the question, introduce yourself and state from which country you come from.
Of course. So my name is Mladen Salatovic. I'm from Belgrade, N1 Television. Thank you for your time, for your stories, and for sharing your opinions with all of us. I would like to ask you something about that position between the aggressor and the victim. Someone mentioned that you should never equalize those two, but I have to ask you, how do you fight against the humanization of the other side? And when I say the other side, I mean of the people who live in those aggression countries, who are making aggression, but they don't support their leaders. How do you fight against presenting them like they are equal to those who are representing them? And should you do it? And I'm asking this because I'm making a documentary about Russian refugees, political refugees who doesn't support Putin, but they think that they are not in enough measure represented in the Western media. What do you do? What do you think about that? And what would you do? Thank you. It's a question for all participants who are willing to answer it.
Who would like to answer? I don't know who is online via Zoom with us still.
You're
Aida,
down,
Nadina,
you're down to us. You're down to us.
Okay, maybe some of us it's.
I think that's actually a fascinating story, because for me, as if I'm watching this conflict from here from Bosnia, it's clear to me who the victim is. It's clear to me who the aggressor is. It's clear to me what the victims think about the aggressor. But the only thing that's missing is, why are Russian people allowing this to be done in their name? And, you know, I always, you know, the TV is on 24 hours, and I always kind of look up and wake up when I see a report from Moscow, because I am truly amazed by the propaganda in Moscow, in Russia, and the effects of it. I think that in order to explain that Russian people are not bad people, they just don't know. So you have to expose, also that's a separate story of what is being done to them. They're also victims. And I think that's a fascinating story. The story about people who understood what was going on and had to leave Russia is also clear to me, you know. But I'm fascinated by the people who didn't, because the brainwashing is going on not only in Russia, everywhere else in the world. We see Trump, January 6th. I think, for example, that all of these people were brainwashed. And how this is done should really be exposed maximally, because the more you talk about the technology of how people are persuaded to vote or do something against their own interest, the more you expose that mechanism, the less victims of it we will have. So I am very interested, and I think that's underreported, of what Russians who agree and disagree think about this whole thing, and how did they decide to think what they think, and that's a very underreported issue. And I think
you agree that we should report more on that topic, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the ones, when you, since you're doing this documentary, as the ones you're talking to who disagree with the official narrative, how come they were not infected and others were? What's the difference between them? How come they have not become susceptible to the propaganda and others didn't? I really want to know. I don't know.
Me too. I'll try it.
Okay, great.
Also, I would like to add that, for example, the Russian parliament adopted a false information law, fake news law, actually.
Yeah.
They forbid the international media and foreign journalists to report on the way which is not on the same level like Russian narrative is. It make things harder, I think, for the people. But on the other hand, there are so much opportunities. We spoke about internet, about social networks. I mean that those people who want to see the truth, that they have abilities to do so, a lot of them.
Would anybody from Zoom would like to add something? Because in this era of social networks and globalization, digitalization, actually, do we have a choice not to know things? Are we also responsible for that?
Okay, let me tell you now a story about why I decided to do what I do. You know, in 1992, I was a young journalist. I actually didn't know anything. I was just learning from all of these people that are on Zoom now. And I was kind of sitting behind Kurt Schork, although Kurt Schork was my competition. But I would kind of sit behind any of those guys now, you know, on briefings and look over their shoulder to see what they're writing down and where they're putting their question marks. So I learned from all of you. And, you know, the purpose of my engagement was that I back then thought that I can stop the war by just reporting about it. I really thought so. I don't know, maybe that's stupid, and it is. But in 1994, it took me 2 years to realize that, as I keep mentioning, I felt like I'm yelling into deaf people's ears. Nothing is happening. Nobody's stopping this. And I really wanted to give up and go to Germany. But then I met this old guy in Sarajevo who was 90 and who I told him that I'm leaving. You know, all of this doesn't make any sense. And then he told me, look, after the Second World War, when you would ask people, where were you that night when they took your neighbors away and took them to Auschwitz? You know, everybody had the same answer. I didn't know. And they didn't know because there was actually no independent journalism in Germany. You know, it was all just propaganda. So yeah, they weren't even worried about these people. Some knew, but you know, but most of the people didn't know. And even then you can't prove that they really didn't know, or is this just an excuse? Now with internet, with social media, with the world being so interconnected, there's so many possibilities to find out. So I decided I'm going to report and put that information out there. And, you know, turn the excuse of I didn't know into a choice. The information is out there, it's available to you. If you don't know, you didn't want to know, which makes you a bad person to me. So I kind of, that's a little bit my motivation.
Okay, should we move to another question? Yes, please.
Hello. I'm Vuk Vujicic from Montenegro. I have a question. Are we going in the danger zone if we only use fact-checking tools to block some media which spread disinformation, because that media will find a way to create a new bubble on some other social networks like Telegram? Or is maybe a better way to do intensive education on citizens and especially journalists to use fact-checking tools and to find a truth and to be resistance to disinformation?
And the question is to whom?
to
Yeah,
any of us.
Yeah, maybe I would suggest Rémy to answer, because Rémy, we lost the connection with you at a certain point. So
Yes, hi. Yeah, I'm back online, but I didn't hear the question. I'm sorry.
yeah, we can repeat it.
Okay, in a few, yeah. Thanks.
Are we going in the danger zone if we only use fact-checking tools to block media who spreading the disinformation, because that media can create new bubble on the other social networks like Telegram and spreading disinformation to the citizens who are on that network? Is maybe a better solution to create intensive education campaign to the citizens and journalists to use fact-checking tools and become resistant of disinformation?
Well, I'm not sure. Fact-checking is what we do all day long. So I don't know which specific tools you are talking about, but I guess you are talking about the post-reporting fact-checking, right?
Talking about blocking some media who spread disinformation, because we have now.
Oh, blocking. Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know really. I guess we are all in favor of freedom of speech, and it's a sensitive question. I think it's not up to the journalists to decide anyway. It's up to elected leaders in democracies to I don't know. I'm not in favor of blocking anyone. Everyone will find a way to tell his truth, whatever you do. I think it's up to the public, to pick up, the truth, to go for independent, fair, and serious journalism. So I know it's sometimes difficult. I mean, there are a lot of informations out there, and it's sometimes maybe easy intellectually, to go for something spectacular, something controversial through Twitter or whatever. But it's not up to us to forbid anyone to tell a story, even if it's a fake one, even if it's wrong. It's up to the public to go for the good journalism, and sometimes I think Aida mentioned it. It costs. Apart from public services, sometimes like radio and television, but very often good journalism. It costs money, so you have to subscribe to good newspapers, to good magazines. It's not out there for free. Yeah, it's a question for the public more than for us, I think.
Aida.
I would like to answer that question too. I think that the role of the people who are educated, have a media education, they know how this works. They know how the techniques of manipulation. They should educate people in their own environment. Because now that you asked this question, it is sort of a censorship, and I'm kind of against censorship. But when I think of some of the members in my media environment, like specifically senior members of my family, I really think the only remedy is just to switch off certain channels from their list, because they're not capable of making this decision. They're so uneducated. There's such a media illiteracy. They're not capable of understanding who's lying and who's not lying. Just to give it up to the public is a little bit too ambitious. That would be good if the public would be educated. But I think we should all try, at least in our immediate environment, to educate people, to tell them, okay, listen, look what is this logical to you? Because to many people, it's not. What we perceive is a black and white thing. You would be surprised how other people, especially the older generation, thinks about this. They're very easily persuaded. And don't forget, remember that scene in the Da Vinci Code? We see what we want to see, we hear what we want to hear. Most of the people are actually looking for information that is going to confirm what they already think. And to change their mind is sometimes almost impossible. So I think, yes, we should block media who are spreading lies, as we are protecting the citizen by punishing him when he doesn't have a seatbelt. Now, what does the state have anything to do with me dying in a car crash? But I'm not capable, obviously, we are not capable enough of thinking about our own interests. So sometimes somebody has to kind of, okay, I'm going to fine you if you don't put your seatbelt on. Over the years now, you don't really see anybody driving around without a seatbelt. It's settled. Now it's a normal thing. Before, you had to find people to act in their own interest. And sometimes you have to intervene. And I think, yes, fact-checking and blocking people from Facebook, fake media from Facebook, I think that's good. What else? What's the alternative? To leave it up to the consumer? I don't trust the consumer can do that. Otherwise, you're doing nothing about lies.
Thank you, Aida. Ed, you raise your hand.
Yes, if just briefly. I mean, but Aida, what's happened? I mean, the head of factual programs at the BBC recently caused quite a stir by saying we need to represent more the people who believe that the Earth is flat on the BBC in the interest of representing opinion. I mean, addressing our colleague who asked the question. I mean, this isn't just a matter of which social media. Well, I can't do social media. I'm too old. But the age does have some advantages. It's not just a question of what's on Twitter, what's on Facebook. By the way, Facebook now run by the ex-Deputy Prime Minister of Britain. It's not just that, it's at the top now. The contamination goes right up to the top. That's what I was trying to say earlier. The BBC now wants to have more people on who think the Earth is flat. They're looking to represent stupidity and lies. It's almost institutionalized. And I think this comes back to what Roger said very movingly about technique. What is media? Media is not just anybody, as Aida said, sitting at home pressing their effing telephone. It's a craft. Journalism, we're talking a little bit today too much as though journalism is some kind of priesthood. It's not, it's an artisan craft. You have to be able to write well, take a good photograph, film in focus, frame your picture well. Roger's account of how to interview people as involving silences, listening, is actually part of the artisan craft of journalism. This idea that anyone could be a journalist because they got a phone is toxic in my view. There's a road to this, and it is as much to do with grammar, spelling, paragraph rhythms, framing your picture, framing your shot, getting your person to talk. I get sick of these anchors who say, well, I've just spoken to a man who said that. Well, where is he? There's too much of this. And I think Roger's point about time, you know, interviews are like jazz. You find a key like Coltrane does, and you see where it goes. And I just wanted to bring in something completely from the side. One of the things about, Rémy was talking at the very beginning of this about the bits of our job which are all to do with the war, but nothing to do with the fighting. And what I always try to do is to bring music into this, to bring, and above all, laughter. One of the things we just don't do enough is comedy. It's the one thing power really does fear, is, you know, the Carnival of Fools. And I just wanted to bring that in as something for you young people to bear in mind. Be funny. If you can be funny, not only do you represent humanity at its best, but you really do tell truth to power if you laugh at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. So, young people, yes.
Hello everyone, I'm Slađan Tomić, journalist of Portal Book. I have a question for Nadina and Rémy. What is harder, save your life in war or save integrity in age of disinformation? Thank you.
Thank you. It's important, the most important thing is to save lives, actually. The second important thing, I mean, saving the integrity and saving life aren't different things. I mean, one goes with another. You can miss information, you can miss news, you can miss to be on the ground, on the place where something very important happened, where you can see maybe or witness bombing of civilians, but it is not about the integrity. It's the most important thing is to save life. If you are not going to that place, if you leave that place, it doesn't mean that you are not a person with integrity. You can keep it with yourself, you can bring it with yourself. But what you cannot do is to miss to tell the truth. So there are, I suppose, I have not much experience in war. As I mentioned before, it was my first time I was in a war zone as a reporter. So maybe other colleagues can tell you more about it. But I think that keeping integrity of a journalist and keeping life is already at the same level. One doesn't exclude another.
Thank you, Nadina. So a question was also for Rémy. Do we have Rémy?
And this is what happens when you report from a war.
So Rémy is unfortunately not with us anymore.
Links, yeah.
Yes. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Oh, okay, three more.
Thank you. My name is Nikola Bačić. I'm a TV reporter for some years now, and I have a question. So, what would you advise to do if you catch both sides of your story blatantly lying to you, trying to manipulate you into taking their side? So I encountered that a couple of times, and to keep my integrity, I just dropped the story, even though it wasn't a bad one. And what to do if you're a part of a media that loses its integrity, not thanks to you, but to some of the colleagues who promoted some kind of a fake story, or was bribed in a way, or just fell for that trap where you have two sides and you choose one because, I don't know, you like it more, or you're impartial to it, or you're too emotional about it, something like that. Thank you.
So who would like to answer?
I think I can. These are situations, you know, I spoke about the media war as an element of a war. And in a media war, you kind of, both sides are trying to manipulate you, one more than the other. What do? You tell the truth. You find out the truth. You don't just report what one side or the other say. You go out, you find the truth, you put it in the context, because it might be that you are not seeing well, because you're not seeing the whole picture, which is why you need colleagues and to drive around and to talk to other people, talk to a third source. What happened to the rule that you need 3 sources for an information? Not 2, but 3. And then, you make your own decision. But, it is totally normal that both or 3 sides are trying to manipulate you. In Bosnia, the biggest manipulators were the ones on the Serb side. The second manipulators was the UN, to me. And the third manipulators were the Bosnians who didn't have time to manipulate. They didn't have electricity. They didn't read the newspapers. They didn't know what was going on. So they were busy with defending themselves and didn't even have a strategy. They didn't even have a plan of how to fight a media war. At some point they established that, but you can't take it, like everything one side says that this is the truth. Ask 3, 4 sides and make your own conclusion. At some point you will kind of develop this type of orchestra in your mind that'll play every time, the trumpets that'll play every time when you encounter propaganda. Okay. I don't know, older colleagues?
Thank you, Aida. Would anybody like to add something? Yes, Javier.
Well, this is related to the question, not specifically to the questions. I mean, he said he dropped the reporting, and it's a good decision, in my opinion. But also, you're going to find out times when you feel that your reporting is increasing the tension in a specific situation, and that could be putting in danger the people that you are interviewing. And I have seen this a couple of times, and I recommend drop the camera. Stop doing the interview. You cannot put in danger. You cannot bring more problems to these people. I remember a specific situation when in Bosnia, actually, when a cameraman friend of mine was recording a group of fighters who were interviewing another guy who was captured, and the situation was becoming hotter and hotter, and the people, and they were getting more excited because they were realizing that the guy was filming, and they were in a point that he understood that they were going to execute that guy, or at least were going to harm this guy, and he dropped the camera. Stop your work. That's not efficient. You are putting in danger people. And even if you think, I mean, there has been all these mythical and symbolic pictures of people being executed on front of the cameras, you don't have to be part of that. That's not your job.
Okay, thank you very much. So I suggest we collect 2 more questions, and then we have to finish, unfortunately, but also we can continue debate during the cocktail afterwards.
Hello everyone, I'm Aida Čerkez from Factoje. It's a fact-checking organization in Albania. I want to ask about something. You were discussing to block medias who share disinformation or misinformation. What about politicians or influencers who share misinformation or disinformation? Because in Albania, we have lots of politicians who do this thing. What we can do with them? How we can protect the audience from misinformation, disinformation from politicians?
Expose it for what it is. Politicians lie. I mean, hello.
For example, our Prime Minister shared a photo from Ukraine war, but in fact that was an old photo of 2060, and he shared was an actual photo of the conflict, Russia-Ukraine. And what we can do about this? They do this often, and this is something that happened. We should block politicians or influencers that we know they have a big impact at the audience, even more than media.
I think you should report that this person lied and explain the origin of the photo. Don't use the word lie. Say this photo was in fact from here and there, and at some point he will lose credibility. I don't know, and don't vote for him.
We made some fact checkings about this, and we found lots of politicians in Albania that have done this thing. Not only one, there are lots of them.
There are lots of them everywhere. Think Trump.
It's better to expose them than to block them, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And the last question will be?
I am Dorentina Castrati, journalist from Birn, Kosovo. Thank you very much for your stories. It was very inspiring for us as young journalists. I have a question for Ms. Čerkez. Today, maybe we can imagine to live for a long time without electricity. But we have other opportunities to charge our phones and equipments. But how was a day as a reporter back in 90s without electricity in a city that was bombed every day for a long time?
Difficult. You had to go everywhere. You can't call anybody, or just a couple of phones were working. You can call those phones. I think I knew them all by heart because it was about 20 of them. And you just get on your way and you go. I am so much against this new trend of reporting about the world from your office. I remember that, when your photographer is sitting all day long in the office, then he's not doing his job. When a reporter is in the office all day, then he or she is not doing his job. You're supposed to go out, see the world, and then come back and write your report. You can't sit in the office and make phone calls to people who will tell you what's going on in the world. So, but at the time, during the war, when there was no electricity and nothing, you just knock on people's doors. You just go around and talk, and you go back and report, put it together, and report about what happened. There was not much choice. I mean, I know you young people cannot imagine a world without mobile phones, but it's possible. Not only without mobile phones, but without money. Okay, without money. That's a special category. You just walk. That's it.
Okay, thank you all. I think that will be all for today. If I just may add for the end, I think it's also very important to bear in mind what's the purpose of the manipulation. Usually it's it's to serve the purpose to justify something that actually cannot be justified. It also serves to polarize societies, as we, for example, saw in the case of Brexit, also to divide. So we have to be aware of that as well. We have to do our best as journalists to try to fight it, to, as you all mentioned, to expose it, especially to expose the lies, to expose those who lie and who lied. So I think that's also important to do with the support of the organizations, both professional but also political ones, such as the European Union, in order to raise the support and also to somehow collect the strength to fight that and to keep professional integrity and to fight. Also, that was the purpose of today's session. We really wanted to share the experience of the top level journalists who have a lot of experience in, especially in war zones and the reporting from the wars, so that they can share with young generations, people who will actually be the new leaders in journalism. And I think we serve the purpose to tell how it is, and also to very simplify the ways forward, and also to map the issues and try to give some solutions and answers. So thank you all once again, especially the panelists who were with us today here in Sarajevo, in Madrid, Paris, London, and Kyiv. Thank for especially Rémy and Nadina for sharing experience from Ukraine with us. Thank you, young journalists, for being with us today, and also thanks to the EU for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you.